Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I am your host, DelSheree Spinner. I'm getting over some sickness, so my voice may sound a little bit froggier than usual, and I apologize about that, but we will get through it. I am excited to have a former Farmington resident, but still local to the Four Corners area author on this show this week. I'm going to be talking to Mark Plets about his book, Kelly, A Tale of Old Ireland. Mark, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, DelSheree. I was born in Phoenix, raised in a little town about an hour north of there called Payson. And from a young age, I just loved writing. I just wanted to write pretty much before I could read. I carried this little plastic file folder around with notebooks and pencils in it. And I just kind of write down ideas and short stories that never really went anywhere. But it was the start of my love of writing. And later, I just started writing some more stories and just little bits and pieces that never really went anywhere until my early 20s. I started writing this book, Kelly.
Where did your interest in Ireland come from?
Well, that's a good question. I kind of grew up watching BBC TV. A lot of that was BBC Scotland and BBC Ireland. And so I just kind of fell in love with the landscapes, the accents, the culture, especially the historical aspects, because it goes back so far and there's just such a rich history that I just developed this desire to write a story that took place in Ireland. My goal, though, was Irish history is notoriously tragic, and I wanted to write something that kind of captured the resilient spirit of Ireland, as well as their wit and kind of humor. So I decided to write a story that would have a really strong character who just kind of did things the way almost all of us would love to get away with in our situation.
Well, and tell us a little bit about Kelly, the character, and then the book as a whole.
In a nutshell, Kelly is about a woman who runs a pub in Ireland in like the 1600s. And she turns out to be the only heir of this landlord who is murdered by his own son. And in that conflict, the son is also killed, and this land is left without a male heir and a ruler. The right-hand man of this landlord finds out that the landlord had an illegitimate child, aka Kelly, and he goes to find her. And this sort of stems from a historical story I once heard, and I wish I could remember where it was, but the gist of it was that there was these clans, and one clan, the patriarch passed away, and he didn't have any male heirs. It was only a daughter. And in this story, she was just pretty much brushed aside, like, yep, there was a daughter, but, there was no way she was going to rule, and it was an era where, yeah, it's not likely going to happen. Clan warfare ensued and tons of bloodshed and for decades. And I remember thinking, how cool would it be if that woman had been able to step up to the plate, so to speak? No disrespect to her. She was in an era where virtually impossible. That's why I wanted to write a story where we have a woman who is not concerned with any of that because she comes from nothing. She's not in this world, so she doesn't care what people think about her. And she kind of steps up to the plate. Of course, tons of mayhem ensues, and she's got to deal with all these problems that she's really not prepared to deal with. But she, as I said, she doesn't care what people think about her and just does what's right.
Well, I was curious with this as far as like those types of laws of ascendancy and who can inherit what and titles and lands and all of that. Really different depending on the location and the time period and whatever the political stuff is going on in a place at that time. I was wondering, because I don't know much about this as far as like the historical likelihood with your story compared to the historical story that you referenced. In this time period, would this have been something that a female could have actually inherited and taken control? Or is this more of like a what-if situation, kind of a changed reality for that time?
This is a what-if situation. I think in the time period that I'm talking about, if it was a succession, as in that story I referenced where there was a daughter, but it wouldn't have even been considered that she would rule. That's why I decided not to set it with the landlord having a daughter in that world, but somebody way outside of that world who is already independent, confident, and comes from a low class and has no ambitions or anything political. So I did that because I figured that's the best way to bend reality, because it is a what-if situation. I set it in a fictional county as well, a very small one that would be located somewhere around County Donegal is where I set it. And I did that also because I wanted this to be kind of a bubble of what could happen.
I like that. I think that's been a popular trend in historical fiction over the last, I don't know, probably decade or so, of just kind of exploring some of those ideas in social and political history of like, if we had not been so dumb
Right.
in this time period, what could things look like today?
I think there's something therapeutic in that, actually. I read and watch some serious drama and things like that, and I love it. I do love it, but there are times when I just kind of want something where I just want to see things happen and have a really good outcome and not always be, and there was, tens of thousands slaughtered and the indigenous people were, of course, exploited. It's like, I want so badly to hear that, you sort of see somebody who just circumvents all of it, somebody you can really root for.
I like that as well. And I think it's a great place to explore that kind of thing and think about what could we be achieving if we looked at things a little bit differently, or if we could put aside certain biases and things like that. Because, man, you see today, like, so much of those mindsets are ruling what's going on in the world today, and it's just causing so much damage. And sometimes fiction is the only place when the world is really chaotic, like it is now, to look at something and how it could be different in a space where you're not going to get politically attacked for it or something like that, or it's just like, but it's fiction, but we can look at things in a different way there.
Well, yeah, and much almost like Shakespeare or something, where he would, try to expose the king in Hamlet. It's like he did not accuse him in that. It's like the king reacted and was like seeing himself. And I think that's the best way fiction works, is we don't need to use political affiliations. We don't need to use any sort of religious stuff, because in fiction we make up our own. And if one sees themselves in that, maybe they will bring that into the real world. And it might maybe influence them for the better one way or another.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of funny. We just wrapped up the school year here. Kind of the last couple days when we'd finished things up, and it was just kind of like low-key, relaxed before finals start.
Yeah.
We had looked at a painting by Norman Rockwell of Ruby Bridges, who was the first African-American young woman to attend school in the Louisiana School District. Norman Rockwell painted this picture of what that scene looked like. And, it's this little 6-year-old girl with these big U.S. Marshals escorting her into the school, and there's a tomato smashed behind them, and the N-word and KKK. And we had looked at that as part of like our comparative analysis unit. And so I had found that there was a somewhat cheesy movie that Disney made in the late 90s. So I was like, oh, perfect. That'll be a nice thing to kind of end on and let them see like what this experience was for her, even though it was clearly, kind of Disney-fied to be a little bit more tolerable. But it was interesting to see how many of my students who I hear the things that they say in the hallway. Plenty of stuff that shouldn't be said in the hallway. Fashionable, I guess, at this time to use the N-word toward each other. They don't really take that sort of thing serious in how much that can be harmful to other people.
Right.
But it was like when they're watching this movie that was, yes, a bit cheesy and silly and some weird musical choices, but it was like when they were seeing grown adult people yelling those words at a 6-year-old child and threatening her life and just being so nasty to her over just attending a specific school.
Right.
It was really interesting to see just like how horrified they were that people actually did that. And hopefully a few of them thought like,
it makes you wince.
My own words. Yeah.
No, that's exactly it. I mean, I think, fiction is often a mirror for us. Well, in that case, it's reality. But I do think that there is something to having something kind of harsh like that makes you wince, where you think, oh, wow, that's how they used to speak. And that was just given and assumed that that's how people would react. And it's not that long ago. And I think that's part of why I do like a lot of historical things, because it always puts it in perspective to me, where pretty much any newspaper headline can be from a century ago, 50 years ago, and it's a lot of the same recurring themes and everything. And I think it's important to remember, because some of these prejudices and things can be, you almost think, oh, well, that's so long ago, but they can still be simmering in places, and it's kind of shocking at how easily that kind of prejudice can come out again.
Yeah, and you highlight several of those. A lot of the topics that we covered this year are all coming back into play just within the last 2 years. I mean, and the things that you bring up in the book that sexism of women not being competent or able or emotionally stable enough, to lead, all the things that have been,
Right.
heaped on women all the time. But you also
Yeah.
go into like the class disparities and thinking about, just because someone is born in a, lower economic condition, then it's like, oh, well, obviously they can't do anything. We couldn't, trust them. And it's like, she's
Right.
running a successful business. So why wouldn't she be
Mhm.
able to translate that to running the estate? Like, she
Right.
has the skills, but just the way that everything is looked at, and oh, you don't have the clan name or the land inheritance, which is important throughout a lot of time, where it's like, well, if you don't own land, you don't have
Oh, you're
rights.
nothing. Yeah, and but
Yeah.
Ireland, that is a big theme in historical Ireland. Is the land was everything. I mean, that owning land meant everything status wise.
Yeah, that was something that came up again with my students, where we talked about who was allowed to vote. And a lot
Oh
of them
yeah,
did not know that at one time you had to own land in order to be
right.
eligible to vote. And I was like, how many of your families wouldn't be able to vote right now if that was still the law? And they were just
Right.
like, what? Like, really? Like, yeah.
No, it's interesting. I mean, and I do have a very romanticized idea of some past eras and things that I've always enjoyed, different eras. Like I love the 1930s, very interesting, fashion and style and stuff. But to actually have lived in the 30s, I mean, it's a volatile time leading up to one of the, most horrendous wars of all time. And when you look back, you only think about certain things. And I've thought the same about in like the draft for the Vietnam War, where it's strange when I've spoken to people from that era that were drafted, and you think they just tell me, they're a regular teenager basically, just doing their thing. I've had moments where I thought, well, how would I have reacted? How would I have dealt with that? If that had been me. And I guess that's also the writer aspect, because it's always asking, the what if, or how would I react in this situation?
I think those questions are so important to consider. Honestly, like, plenty of people don't. They just, take the situation for what it is and, deal with it or accept it, or,
Yeah,
however they cope with it or handle it. And it's like, well, just keep getting through things. And it's easy to get stuck in that a million things to do. You've got the weight of everything and taking care of
right.
people and doing this and paying
Sure.
bills and all that. It is really easy to just stay focused on your situation and get through it and not stop and be like, well, could this be improved? Could this be better? I think it takes people to kind of stop and think about that and point it out in some way, whatever creative art form people take, or just to talk about it,
Yeah.
to get out there and say something. Because I think it's not always the natural inclination for most people to say, like, what if, like, could we make this situation better or more
Right.
tolerable or whatever? I appreciate people who do that, because we need it, I
Same here.
think.
And this is why art, music, creativity that's always been my most favorite things in life. And much like we were just discussing, I put them on the back burner for most of my life because of, well, my era, it was had to go to college. There was no question about it. It's like, you're going to be living on the street if you don't go to college. And ironically, it's almost turned in the opposite. But the point is that those creative things have always been the most important thing to me. And I've slowly understood why over the years, because I realize they're the things that keep me sane. They're the things that keep me on the track that I care about, what I care about doing, being here in this world too. It's just, they're the things that matter the most, because I think it's not most people's fault for not asking why, because especially now, gas prices are skyrocketed, groceries are different. I mean, it is difficult because the day-to-day grind is just kind of thinking, okay, got to make sure get all this stuff done, because it's make sure ends meet at the end of each month and stuff. It's tough. I do think that's where art really serves all of us, because it's kind of a leisure activity, whether it's watching a movie, reading a book. It's kind of our downtime as well, but it's like that downtime that kind of is not just to relax, but it also kind of puts our mind back where we most of us probably want it, on the things that matter.
Yeah. And I think, for all of us, we have those times in life where the most you can do is get through the day and deal with
Exactly.
what's on your
Mhm.
plate in that moment. And we all kind of shift through those periods at different times, which I think is why, like, it is really great that different people at different times have those, like, quiet questionings and the what if and how do I create something or do something different, because that may be that person's time to really explore that. while someone else is getting through the day and that is their triumph of just, I made it to the end of
Yeah,
to 10 o'clock, I can go to bed now.
it's no joke. No, I mean that is just getting to the end of the day and still being you is perhaps one of the best things any of us can do. It's to remain, to keep being who we are, to keep sharing that, and to hopefully just be kind to each other, and just try and make tomorrow a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to laugh. And that's something I wanted to point out, that you bring a lot of lightness and humor into your book as well. Like I said before, like you highlight some serious issues of classism and sexism and just,
Right.
the changes in society over time. But you also bring in some really great lightness and humor, and you make it a fun exploration of those topics. You think and then you laugh along the way as you're considering it.
I'm glad. Yeah, that's most of the fans of this book have said the same thing, where they appreciated that they didn't really expect that much humor in a book of this era and stuff, rightfully so, but they appreciated the humor that was in it. And I think again that comes from where Kelly came from, just kind of low class, low just, and she's obviously comfortable in her own skin. At some point in the book, when she's running the estate, and some of the people are just like, I can't work for a woman, and a group of guys come to her in mass and they're like, we can't work for a woman. She's like, fine, go. And I liked that aspect about her, that she just, I mean, she doesn't care. I mean, it's like, okay, well, now how are we going to take care of everything here? But I think I really wanted a character who was like that, where it's not going to get wishy-washy, or not going to cave in to the social pressure and stuff, and was already just basically, yeah, we'll figure it out.
I enjoyed that about Kelly's character. And I did want to ask you, like, as far as your character development in your approach to that, because you have a range of characters with very different personalities, different approaches, and they stand out from each other in a distinct way, which is great. It's always nice when that happens and it's not kind of like one big blend of similar personalities.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you, like, what is your approach for developing your characters to make them distinct from each other and memorable like that?
That's a good question, and that is actually something that I gained from taking a couple courses in when I was going to Prescott Community College. The main thing I did to change my characters, first of all, I liked a lot of historical fiction, and what I will say, something that sometimes overwhelms me in historical fiction is there'll be 4 or 5 pages of like the cast of characters, and as I start reading the book, I keep forgetting, okay, well, who is this and how are they related? And that's good and all. And I enjoy those kinds of books. But it's the kind of thing that if when I set it down and come back, I think, oh my goodness, I don't remember who was who. So for my method in this is I really wanted every character to be distinct. How I originally started that was dialogue. It was an exercise I did years ago in a class, and it was, can you identify who is who in like this play we read or book we read? Simply, we'd be given a list of quotes from the book from characters that said things. And you had to identify which quote was said by which character. And that really stuck with me. I thought I would love it if my dialogue was such that you could kind of identify who said it simply by the way it was said.
I love that as an activity because it is so easy for all the dialogue to blend together and to kind of be in the author's voice on the first draft,
Right.
especially.
I agree.
Really taking that time and putting in the attention to be like, okay, how would this person phrase this? Or what is their vocabulary like? How are they going to say something when they're angry versus when they're happy?
Right.
Like
Yes.
it's really intentional to build that in.
Yeah, and I think it goes a long way when that's the planning process that I think is really important. I mentioned to you earlier how I used to get bogged down in endless outlining and really planning plots so that I know every detail that's going to happen versus, okay, start writing, get this down. I will say that some unique characterization for each character is something that's worth putting the time in up front.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of those things that it's a lot of work to go back and fix later once you've gotten through a whole
Yeah.
draft and you're like, oh, they all sound exactly the same.
I couldn't agree more, because that's something like, that's almost like you've done the wiring for your house and the walls are up and now you need to change the wiring. It's like, oh, now you got to break into the walls in order to undo this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not super big on, doing outlines or character Bibles, different things like that.
Mhm.
But I spend a lot of time mentally planning those things and thinking about it when I'm not writing or I don't have time to get to the
Yeah,
computer, where it's still like, I'll run through conversations in my head or think about how a scene is going to play out and different character reactions and stuff like that. Because it's like the better I know the character, the more I can then like put that onto the page for the reader to understand and communicate who they are. But it's like, if you don't know who they are, that's really hard. And sometimes the process is just, open a blank document and start writing and see what happens. I've certainly done that many times.
same
But
here.
I have learned over the years that even if I like, get down a couple pages to get the idea down, if I take a step back and take some time to like talk it out with someone or think through it, or like you said, kind of run through some of those in my head, when I come back to it, I can look at what I had before, make some adjustments, and then go on in a much stronger style once I have kind of more of a solid concept of who the characters are, even if I have no idea what the story is going to be yet. When I
Right.
have
Well,
the
I mean,
characters, it helps.
I believe that, I mean, for me, I like character driven stories. I like basically, character that you want to go along for the ride. You're not really that concerned what the genre is or what the plot is, but you just want to be with this character. And I think those methods you were talking about, where you maybe have the dialogue in your head, I think it's whatever works is what gets it down, because it's the end result. If character is memorable, if the dialogue's memorable, we did our job then. And I think what you were saying, I've talked to writers who actually will have a mock conversation out loud with their character. Just alone, they'll just kind of talk to get the idea of how would they respond if I said this to them. I think that's a really cool exercise. I have not been able to use it too well myself, but I think it's a great way to develop a character.
Yeah, I think some people are a little better at that part than others.
Yeah, and I think it's their personality, perhaps their background. I mean,
Hmm.
maybe if you have a theater background, maybe that would work better. I think it's a cool idea, and honestly, I've wished I could get that going a little bit better in my own way. But for me, it's usually the writing, usually by hand. I just something about tactile writing with a pencil just connects something in my brain where the gears get turning.
Oh yeah, there's actually quite a bit of research on the benefits of handwriting things, and I use it a lot in my classroom because it sticks. They remember things better. They process your brain processes information and ideas differently when you write it down by hand than when you type it or when you just hear it. If you do all of them, then even better, but
Right.
but it is a really interesting dynamic of the physical act of writing and the way your mind works with that information, whether in an academic or creative way. There's a surprising amount of people who still handwrite at least some portion of their creative process. So they find like it just works better for them in some way. And, not everybody, for sure. Everybody's got their own process that they go through. But it's something like if people are struggling to work through a plot point or get to know a character or just aren't feeling like writing, but they want to, like they want to build that habit up. I've read quite a bit about how just that the physical handwriting, pen on paper, can really just improve that process and help get ideas flowing. It's pretty interesting.
It really is. I think it's fascinating. I did read an article in some business type magazine last year that was all about handwriting and the studies that have been done and showed students that only used a tablet and students that would use take some notes with writing. I mean, it was a significant increase in the amount of information they retained writing by hand versus only typing. And I've definitely found that for myself, because I remember when I was in college that I did only handwritten notes. And one of the reasons I liked that was more often than not, if I wrote something down by hand, I didn't even have to reference my notes. If it was notes I made on a computer, they just didn't stick.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how it actually works with the neurons and whatever, but I would challenge people to give it a try and just see, like, if you're not a person who really like handwrites hardly anything anymore. We have so many devices that can do that for us that it's easy to not ever do it. But I think it would be an interesting challenge for people to take on, to just see the difference between handwriting notes or, whatever it is that they do in their daily life, but actually handwriting that down and see what difference it makes. But yeah, I've found with the creative process, especially when I'm like going through doing a revision, if I will write down questions I have or things that I'm like, I don't think that quite works out with something I said later, things I need to fix, then I catch a lot more. And as I'm going through looking for stuff, like my brain seems to be subconsciously like putting those pieces together and working things out. And like, I don't know, I process it better, whatever is happening in there with all the, things in your brain.
I completely agree. I think our, the pathways in the brain are fascinating, and I think, we still know only a fraction of how they work, because we keep seeing, connections between this and that, and how it enhances memory and learning. And for me especially, I mean, when it comes to straight up creative fiction, I have to start with my handwriting notes, jotting down characters, ideas about them, and plot points, because it doesn't work when I'm looking at a blank document page on my computer. What's funny is it kind of works. They work in tandem though, because a lot of times if I start writing by hand and I get a lot of ideas where I'm thinking my hand can't keep up with what I want to get out here, then it's okay. Then I get on the computer, boom, hammer it out. But to get it started, it's like the car won't start unless I use the pencil.
That's interesting. I like that. Well, and we are just about out of time. And before we start to wrap up, I did want to ask you, because you'd mentioned earlier when we were chatting before that you are working on a new project. Is there anything you can share about that at the moment? And if not, that's okay too.
No, that's no problem. I definitely can share about it. It's something I actually got in the works just before I went on a writing hiatus there. And what it is many people have told me I should do a young adult series. Come on, you should do a young adult series. And I think it is a very good market to be in as a writer, obviously. And so, I mean, I jotted some notes down a few years back, and I'm only just really getting that put together. I'm actually almost done with the first installment. So I'm at about 55,000 words and for the first draft. So basically, it's an unusual concept, but I really like how it's playing out and how it's working. So I guess I would describe it as a cross between like Tomb Raider and Harry Potter. Two kind of unlikely genres, but they're kind of intermixed in this story. So it's about a teenage girl who wakes up in the woods and has no memory of who she is and anything else, but she starts to slowly discover she's got these strange powers, and it just kind of goes from there. I don't want to give away too much right now, because I've definitely got some more work to do on it, but that's kind of the gist.
I like that combination. I think that sounds really fun. Well, cool. Well,
Yeah, so it's basically going to be magic and archaeology kind of interwoven together.
I like it. Well, stay in touch. Let me know when you're ready to come back and talk about it. I think that'll be a fun one to read and chat about.
I would love to.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we are at the point to start wrapping up. Mark, where can people find you and the book online if they'd like to check it out?
All right, well, on Amazon.com, if you search my name, Mark Plets, last name is Plets. Thankfully, I have a very unusual Belgian last name, and you're pretty much guaranteed to find me if you type in that name. So on Amazon, just search for Mark Plets, and you'll find my books. My website is theworldismydesk.com, spelled just like it is. The World Is My Desk.
Awesome. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for people to find you easily. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and chat about writing and handwriting and all kinds of things. This was really great.
Thank you, DelSheree, for inviting me, and I really enjoyed speaking with you.